May 19, 1983. A mother speeds to the Oregon night. 3 children bleeding in her backseat. But what happened on that dark road would shatter everything America believed about maternal love. Picture this. It's almost 11 p.m. at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital in Springfield, Oregon. The emergency room doors burst open. A woman stumbles in, her arm bleeding, screaming for help. Behind her, paramedics rush in 3 small bodies on stretchers. 7-year-old Cheryl isn't moving. 8-year-old Christie is fighting for every breath, with blood everywhere. 3-year-old Danny is crying, but something's terribly wrong. He can't feel his legs. The mother, Diane Downs, tells a horrifying story through tears. A stranger with bushy hair stopped her car on a lonely road. He wanted her car. When she said no, he opened fire on her babies. She drove as fast as she could to save them. But here's the thing that made everyone's blood run cold. Something wasn't right. While her daughter lay dying and her sons fought for their lives, Diane seemed calm, too calm. The nurses whispered among themselves. Normal mothers would be hysterical. Normal mothers would be covered in their children's blood from trying to help them. Instead, Diane was worried about her hair, about calling her boyfriend, about everything except her dying children. What really happened on Old Mohawk Road that night? Why was this mother more concerned about her love life than her children's lives? And how could someone look so peaceful after watching their own babies get shot? What I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about motherhood. This isn't just a story about murder. This is about the ultimate betrayal, when the person who's supposed to protect you becomes the person you need protection from. Before we dive into this nightmare, drop a comment and let me know, where in the world are you watching from? I absolutely love seeing our true crime family spread across the globe. It reminds me that no matter where we are, we all believe that justice matters. And if you're new here, welcome to Not True Crimes Untangled. Hit that subscribe button right now because I bring you the cases that will keep you up at night, the ones that show us just how dark the human heart can get. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Because what Diane Downs did to her own children and what she's been doing for the past 40 years to cover it up will leave you speechless. And angry. Really, really angry. Are you ready? Let's untangle this web of lies together. By the way, I've hidden a little gift for you inside this video. If you love true crime and want to dig deeper than the headlines ever allow, keep watching. I'll tell you how to unlock it. Now, to understand how a mother could do the unthinkable to her own children, we need to go back and meet the real Diane Downs. Because what you're about to discover will chill you to the bone. Diane Elizabeth Downs was born on August 7, 1955, in Phoenix, Arizona. From the outside, she looked like she had it all together. Pretty, charming, the kind of woman who could light up a room when she walked in. But underneath that perfect smile was something dark. Something is broken. At just 18 years old, Diane married Steve Downs. Most teenage brides dream of happily ever after, right? Not Diane. She was already cheating on Steve before their first anniversary. And I'm not talking about one affair. This woman had boyfriend after boyfriend, sometimes multiple men at the same time. Here's what's really disturbing. Diane didn't just cheat because she was unhappy. She cheated because she was obsessed with the chase, the thrill, the drama. She loved being wanted, being desired, and being the center of attention. Her own husband and children, they were just there. Between 1974 and 1979, Diane had 3 children, Christie, Cheryl, and Danny. But here's the heartbreaking truth. She never really wanted to be a mother. These weren't beloved babies to her. They were accessories, props for her perfect life performance. Neighbors later told police that Diane would leave those kids alone for hours, sometimes days, while she went out with her latest boyfriend. Christie, the oldest, was basically raising her younger siblings by the time she was 6 years old. 6 years old, taking care of babies because their mother was too busy playing house with strangers. But everything changed when Diane met Robert Knickerbocker in 1981. Everyone called him Nick, and from the moment she laid eyes on him, Diane was completely, totally obsessed. Now, Nick was married with kids of his own. Most normal people would respect that boundary, right? Not Diane. She saw it as a challenge. She started showing up at his work, calling his house, writing him love letters that would make your skin crawl. Here's where the story gets really twisted. Nick made it crystal clear to Diane that he did want children in his life. Not his own, and definitely not hers. But instead of walking away like any sane person would, Diane heard this as a problem she could solve. Think about that for a second. A man tells her he doesn't want kids around, and instead of thinking, maybe this isn't the right guy for me, she starts thinking, how do I get rid of the kids? Psychologists who studied this case later said that Diane showed all the classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder. She literally couldn't understand that other people, including her own children, had feelings, needs, or rights that mattered more than her wants. The warning signs were everywhere. Teachers noticed the kids coming to school hungry, wearing dirty clothes. Christie started having nightmares. Little Danny would cry whenever his mom left the room. But nobody put the pieces together. Nobody imagined that a mother could see her own children as obstacles to remove. By early 1983, Nick was pulling away from Diane completely. He was tired of the drama, tired of her desperation. And that's when Diane made a decision that would destroy 4 lives forever. The perfect storm was brewing. A narcissistic mother, a man who rejected her children, and 3 innocent babies caught in the middle of a woman's twisted obsession. What happened next would shock the world. May 19, 1983, started like any other Thursday for Diane Downs. But by the end of that night, 3 innocent children would be fighting for their lives, and one wouldn't make it home. Earlier that evening, around 7 p.m., Diane drove to Nick's house. She was desperate. For weeks, he'd been avoiding her calls, ignoring her letters, and making it clear their relationship was over. But Diane couldn't accept rejection. In her mind, if she could just talk to him one more time, she could fix everything. When Nick opened his door and saw Diane standing there, his face said it all. He didn't even let her inside. Right there on his front porch, he delivered the words that would seal 3 children's fate. It's over, Diane. I don't want you. I don't want your kids. Leave me alone. For most people, that would be heartbreaking but final. For Diane, it was a challenge. As she drove away from Nick's house that night, her mind was racing. If the kids were the problem, then she'd solve the problem. Around 9:30 p.m., Diane loaded Christie, Cheryl, and Danny into a red Nissan. She told them they were going for a drive to see a friend. 8-year-old Christie was excited. Mom rarely took them anywhere fun. 7-year-old Cheryl snuggled up with her favorite stuffed animal. 3-year-old Danny was already getting sleepy in his car seat. They had no idea they were driving toward a nightmare. Diane drove them to Old Mohawk Road, a dark, isolated stretch of highway about 10 miles outside Springfield. No houses, no streetlights, no witnesses. She pulled over and stopped the car. What happened in those next few minutes is almost too horrible to imagine, but we know from the evidence that Diane took out a .22 caliber pistol and shot her own children at point-blank range. Christie was shot in the chest. The bullet punctured her lung and caused massive internal bleeding. Cheryl, sweet little Cheryl, was shot in the back. The bullet went straight through her heart. She died almost instantly. Danny was shot in the back too, the bullet severing his spinal cord and paralyzing him forever. Then, to make her story believable, Diane shot herself in the left arm, but barely. Just a surface wound that would look dramatic but heal quickly. At 10:48 p.m., Diane screeched into the emergency bay at Mackenzie Willamette Hospital. She stumbled out of the car, screaming about a carjacker, about a bushy-haired stranger who tried to steal her car and shot her babies when she refused. But here's what made everyone's skin crawl. Her behavior was all wrong. Dr. Stephen Wilhite was the first physician to treat the children that night. Years later, he said he'd never forget how calm Diane seemed. While the medical team fought to save Christie and Danny, while little Cheryl lay dead on a stretcher, Diane was asking nurses about her hair, about whether the bandage on her arm looked too big. Nurse Shelby Day remembered Diane's first question wasn't, "Will my children be okay?" It was, "Can I call my boyfriend?" Even more disturbing, Diane kept talking about that boyfriend, Nick, to anyone who would listen. She told doctors, nurses, and even police officers about how much she loved him and how they were meant to be together. Her children were dying, but she was talking about her love life. Detective Ray Broderick noticed something else that made his blood run cold. When most parents see their injured children, they try to comfort them, hold their hands, and stay close. Diane stood back. She seemed almost annoyed by the chaos. I know this is hard to listen to, but if you're still here, you understand that these victims deserve to have their story told. Most people would scroll away from stories as difficult, but you're different. You know that Christie, Cheryl, and Danny deserve justice, even all these years later. Hit that like button if you believe justice matters. It helps more people see these important stories about real victims who can't speak for themselves anymore. Because what came next would prove that sometimes the person you trust most is the one you should fear the most. While Diane Downs was spinning her story about a mysterious carjacker, Detective Doug Welch and his team were quietly piecing together the truth. And what they found would blow her lies wide open. The first red flag came from the crime scene itself. If a stranger had really tried to carjack Diane, there should have been evidence everywhere. Footprints in the dirt, fingerprints on the car, some sign of a struggle. But when investigators combed through Old Mohawk Road with a fine-tooth comb, they found absolutely nothing. Even stranger, Diane claimed the gunman had reached through her driver's side window to shoot her children in the backseat. But here's the problem. The bullet trajectories didn't match. The angles were all wrong. For the shots to hit the children the way they did, the gun would have had to be fired from inside the car, not outside. Then came the ballistics report that changed everything. The bullets recovered from Christie and Danny's bodies came from a .22 caliber Ruger pistol. And guess what? Police discovered that Diane's ex-husband, Steve, still had the registration papers for that exact type of gun. A gun he bought for Diane years earlier. But Detective Welch wasn't just looking at physical evidence. He was studying Diane herself. He'd interviewed hundreds of crime victims over the years, and something about her behavior was setting off every alarm bell in his head. Real victims of violent crimes are usually traumatized, shaken, and barely able to speak coherently. Diane? She was giving detailed interviews to anyone with microphone. She seemed to enjoy the attention, the drama, and being the center of everyone's focus. Even more disturbing, Diane kept bringing up her boyfriend Nick in every conversation. While her children were in intensive care, she was asking detectives if they thought Nick would visit her in the hospital. She was worried about how she looked and whether Nick would still find her attractive with her bandaged arm. This is when investigators decided to dig deeper into Diane's personal life, and what they found was absolutely chilling. They discovered diary entries Diane had written in the months before the shooting. Pages and pages where she talked about how her children were ruining her life, keeping her from finding true love. One entry, dated just 3 weeks before the shooting, was particularly bone-chilling. "I wish I didn't have kids. Nick would love me if I didn't have kids. When detectives interviewed Nick Knickerbocker, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Nick confirmed that he'd made it crystal clear to Diane multiple times that he didn't want children in his life. Not his own, and definitely not hers. He told investigators that Diane had become increasingly desperate and obsessive about their relationship. The timeline investigators built was devastating. Phone records showed Diane had called Nick 17 times in the week before the shooting. Witnesses confirmed she'd been seen driving by his house repeatedly. His neighbors remembered her showing up at all hours, sometimes just sitting in her car outside his home. Then came the behavioral analysis that sealed Diane's fate. FBI profiler Robert Ressler studied the case and concluded that the crime showed clear signs of maternal filicide motivated by a desire to eliminate obstacles to a romantic relationship. In plain English, Diane had killed her own children to get them out of the way. On February 28, 1984, almost 10 months after the shooting, police arrived at Diane's door with an arrest warrant. Her reaction? Not shocked, not grief, not the breakdown you'd expect from someone falsely accused of murdering their own children. Instead, Diane seemed almost excited. She immediately started talking about how this would prove her innocence and how the real killer would be caught now. She was more concerned about doing her hair and makeup for the perp walk than understanding the charges against her. The public was stunned. How could mother do this to her own babies? The media went absolutely crazy. News vans lined up outside the courthouse. Reporters called the crime that shattered America's faith in motherhood. But Diane? She was loving every minute of the attention, because that's what this had always been about. Making sure all eyes were on her, no matter what the cost. Even when faced with overwhelming evidence, Diane never once asked about her surviving children's recovery. She never showed an ounce of remorse for Cheryl's death. The mask was finally off. May 8th, 1984. Lane County Courthouse in Eugene, Oregon, was packed to the rafters. People had been camping out since dawn just to get a seat for the trial. Everyone was calling the case that would define evil. And they were about to witness something that would haunt them forever. From the moment Diane Downs walked into that courtroom, she acted like she was the star of her own movie. While most defendants facing murder charges looked scared or broken, Diane looked excited. She waved to the cameras, smiled at reporters, and even blew a kiss to someone in the gallery. Prosecutor Fred Hughey opened the trial with words that sent chills to the packed courtroom. This case is about a mother who valued a man's love more than her children's lives. A woman who saw her own babies as obstacles to remove, not precious lives to protect. But if prosecutors thought Diane would show some humility, they were dead wrong. Halfway through the trial, she fired her defense attorney and decided to represent herself. Can you imagine? A woman accused of murdering her own child thought she was smarter than trained lawyers. The courtroom became Diane's stage, and she played her part to perfection. The role of the wronged, misunderstood victim. She strutted around in front of the jury, flipped her hair, and spoke about herself in the third person like some kind of celebrity. But then came the testimony that would destroy her forever. Dr. Stephen Wilhite took the stand and described Diane's behavior at the hospital that night. How she'd been more worried about her appearance than her dying children. How she'd asked about calling her boyfriend while Cheryl lay dead just feet away. The jury's faces said it all. Disgust, horror, disbelief. Ballistics expert James Pex explained how the bullet trajectories proved the shots came from inside the car, not from some mysterious stranger outside. He used diagrams, photos, and models to show exactly how Diane had positioned the gun to shoot her own children. When Nick Knickerbocker testified about telling Diane he didn't want children in his life, you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. Here was the motive laid bare for everyone to see. Diane had eliminated her children like obstacles in her path to love. But the moment that broke everyone's heart and sealed Diane's fate came when 9-year-old Christie took the witness stand. This little girl, still recovering from her stroke, still dealing with the trauma of being shot by her own mother, walked slowly to the witness box. Her speech was slurred from her injuries, but her voice was clear and strong when Prosecutor Hughie asked the question everyone had been waiting for. "Christie, do you remember who shot you and your brother and sister?" The courtroom held its breath. Christie looked directly at her mother, the woman who was supposed to love and protect her, and said 3 words that echoed around the world. "My mom did it." Diane's reaction? Nothing. No tears. No breakdown. No emotional response at all. She just sat there, stone-faced, like Christie had commented on the weather. Even more chilling, during breaks in Christie's testimony, Diane was seen chatting with reporters, laughing with supporters, and acting like this was all some kind of game. While her own daughter relived the worst night of her life on the witness stand, Diane was thinking about her image. The defense Diane presented was almost insulting to the jury's intelligence. She stuck to her story about the bushy-haired stranger, even though every piece of evidence proved she was lying. She showed the jury her arm wound, trying to gain sympathy, not realizing it actually proved how calculated she was. Shooting herself just enough to look like a victim, but not enough to cause real damage. When it came time for closing arguments, Diane gave a performance that would have been laughable if it weren't so tragic. She talked about herself for over an hour, barely mentioning her dead daughter Cheryl or her injured children Christie and Danny. It was all about poor, misunderstood Diane. On June 17, 1984, after less than 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of murder, guilty of attempted murder, guilty of assault. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Judge Gregory Foote didn't hold back during sentencing. He looked directly at Diane and said words that still give me chills. "The court finds the defendant shows no remorse and remains a danger to society. You will serve life in prison plus 50 years with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Diane's response? She smiled. Actually smiled. It was like the judge had just given her a compliment instead of a life sentence. If you're feeling that same anger and disbelief right now, you're not alone. Only people who truly care about justice make it this far into these difficult stories. Most people can't handle hearing about the darkest parts of human nature, but you understand that these victims deserve to have their truth told. Smash that like button and let me know in the comments. Do you think she got what she deserved? Because what happened next will show you that even behind bars, Diane's lies were just getting started. You'd think that a life sentence would humble someone, make them reflect on what they'd done, maybe even find some remorse. But if you thought prison would change Diane Downs, you'd be dead wrong. From the moment she walked into Oregon Women's Correctional Center in 1984, Diane acted like she was on some kind of twisted vacation. While other inmates kept their heads down and tried to blend in, Diane was working every angle she could find. She charmed guards, manipulated fellow prisoners, and turned every conversation into a chance to proclaim her innocence. "I didn't do it," became her constant refrain. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I miss my children." Just endless denials and blame. But here's where Diane's true character really showed. She started writing letters. Hundreds of them. To reporters, to lawyers, to anyone who would listen. And every single letter was the same sick fantasy. Poor Diane, wrongly convicted, suffering behind bars while the real killer walked free. Prison staff quickly realized they were dealing with someone dangerous in a whole different way. Diane wasn't violent with other inmates, but she was a master manipulator. She convinced new prisoners that she was innocent, get them to write letters for her, even talks them into romantic relationships. Then came July 11th, 1987, the day that proved Diane still believed she was above the law. In broad daylight, during a work detail in the prison yard, Diane scaled a fence and escaped. Just walked right out of a maximum security facility, like she was leaving a hotel. For 10 days, She was on the run while law enforcement launched one of the biggest manhunts in Oregon history. How did they finally catch her? She couldn't resist the spotlight. Diane was spotted at a local bar, telling anyone who would listen about her wrongful conviction. Even as a fugitive, she was more interested in getting attention than staying hidden. When police arrested her, her first words weren't, "I'm sorry," or "I made a mistake." She said, "This proves I'm innocent." Innocent people try to escape. The escape attempt got her transferred out of Oregon entirely. Prison officials realized they couldn't handle her manipulation and attention-seeking behavior. She bounced between facilities in California and New Jersey, leaving a trail of chaos wherever she went. At every new prison, the same pattern repeated. Diane would arrive acting like the victim, telling her sob story to anyone who'd listen. She'd form inappropriate relationships with guards and inmates, always trying to use people to get what she wanted. Prison psychologists who evaluated her over the years all came to the same conclusion. Diane showed zero remorse, zero empathy, and zero understanding that she'd done anything wrong. Even decade behind bars couldn't crack her delusion that she was the real victim in this story. The most disturbing part? Diane never once asked about Christie or Danny's recovery, never sent them letters apologizing, never showed any interest in how her surviving children were doing. It was like they didn't exist once they couldn't serve her purposes anymore. By the 1990s, Diane had settled into a routine that would define the rest of her life. Endless appeals, constant media interviews, and a never-ending stream of lies designed to convince the world that she was innocent. Prison had become just another stage for Diane's performance, and she was determined to keep the show going, no matter how many people she hurt along the way. The woman who killed her own child for love was now in love with something else entirely, her own victim narrative. Here we are, over 40 years later, and Diane Downs is still telling lies. But here's what's truly mind-blowing. Her story keeps changing, getting more elaborate and more ridiculous with each passing year. Remember her original story? The bushy-haired stranger who tried to carjack her on Old Mohawk Road? Well, that was just the beginning. As the years went on, Diane's imagination ran wild. In the 1990s, she started claiming it was a government conspiracy. She told ABC News that federal agents had killed her children to silence her because she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have. When asked what she supposedly witnessed, her story got fuzzy and kept changing. By the 2000s, Diane was spinning an even more outrageous tale. Now she claimed that prosecutors had planted evidence, that witnesses had been coerced, and that the entire justice system had framed her. She wrote a book. Yes, a book called The Best Kept Secret, where she painted herself as some kind of wrongfully convicted hero. But the real test of Diane's lies came during her parole hearings. Every few years, she'd sit across from a parole board and have the chance to tell the truth, show remorse, and maybe earn her freedom. Instead, she doubled down on her delusions every single time. 2008, parole denied. The board noted that Diane showed no remorse and continued to deny responsibility for her crimes. 2010, parole denied again. This time, the board was even more direct. They said her continued denial made her a danger to society and showed she hadn't learned anything from her decades in prison. 2020, still denied. At 65 years old, Diane sat before that parole board and told the same lies she'd been telling for nearly 40 years. She actually told them that admitting guilt would put her surviving children in danger from the real killer. Think about that for a second. This woman used her own children, the one she shot, as an excuse not to tell the truth. Even her surviving kids became props in her twisted performance. And get this, in 2024, at 69 years old, Diane filed yet another appeal claiming wrongful conviction. After 4 decades, multiple courts, and overwhelming evidence, she's still playing the victim. So why can't she just admit what she did? Psychologists who studied her case have some chilling insights. Dr. Diane Folingstad, an expert on criminal psychology, explained that for someone with Diane's level of narcissistic personality disorder, admitting guilt would completely destroy their sense of self. In Diane's mind, she's not capable of being wrong, so reality has to bend to fit her narrative. It's like she's created an alternate universe in her head, where she's the hero of her own story, the grieving mother, the wrongly accused victim. The woman is fighting against a corrupt system. In that fantasy world, she never has to face the truth about what she really is, a mother who murdered her own child. Dr. J. Reed Malloy, a forensic psychologist who consulted on the case, put it perfectly. Diane Downs would rather spend the rest of her life in prison as an innocent victim than spend one day in freedom as a guilty child killer. That's the terrifying reality of dealing with someone this narcissistic. The lies aren't just a defense mechanism. They become her entire identity. She's told her story so many times that she might actually believe it herself now. After 40 years, 3 denied parole hearings, and countless failed appeals, Diane Downs is exactly where she started, completely convinced that everyone else is wrong and she's the only one telling the truth. Some people never change, and some lies never end. Now, after hearing about decades of lies and manipulation, let me tell you about the real heroes in this story, Christie and Diane Downs. Because while their mother was busy playing victim in prison, these two incredible kids were proving that love really can triumph over evil. After the shooting, both Christie and Diane were placed in foster care while they recovered from their horrific injuries. Christie had to relearn how to speak clearly after her stroke. Diane faced the reality of being paralyzed from the chest down for the rest of his life. These children had every reason to be broken, angry, and lost. But here's where this dark story gets a beautiful twist. Fred Hughey, the prosecutor who put their mother behind bars, and his wife, Joanne, decided to adopt both children. Think about that. The man who fought for justice in court continued fighting for these kids at home. The Hugheys gave Christie and Diane something their biological mother never could: unconditional love, stability, and the chance to heal. They legally changed the children's last names, giving them a fresh start away from the Downs' legacy of lies and violence. Christie grew up to be a strong, intelligent woman. Despite the speech difficulties from her stroke, she graduated high school, went to college, and built a life filled with genuine relationships. She got married, had children of her own, and became the loving mother that Diane never was. Danny, despite being confined to a wheelchair, refused to let his paralysis define him. He adapted, learned to drive specially equipped vehicles, pursued his education, and found ways to live independently. His determination and positive attitude amazed everyone who met him. But here's the most powerful part of their story. Both Christie and Diane made a conscious decision to cut all contact with their mother. No visits, no letters, no phone calls. They recognized that the woman who gave birth to them was toxic and dangerous and had no place in their healthy lives. They chose healing over hatred. They chose truth over the lies their mother was still telling. And they chose to build lives that honored their sister Cheryl's memory instead of dwelling in the darkness of that terrible night. Meanwhile, Diane continues her pathetic existence at Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California. At 69 years old, she's now a gray-haired, elderly woman who still spends her days writing letters, giving interviews, and spinning the same tired lies she's been telling for 4 decades. The prison staff describes her as manipulative and attention-seeking, still trying to charm guards and convince fellow inmates of her innocence. She's like a broken record, stuck playing the same song over and over again. Here's something that might shock you. Diane could actually be eligible for parole again soon. California's changing parole laws mean that even lifers sometimes get second, third, or fourth chances. But every expert who's evaluated her case agrees she remains a danger to society because she's never accepted responsibility for her actions. The thought of this woman walking free while Cheryl remains in her grave is absolutely sickening, especially knowing that Christie and Danny have built beautiful lives despite what she did to them, while Diane wastes away in her cell, clinging to her lies and delusions. Her surviving children are out there proving that evil doesn't have to win. They're living proof that sometimes the best revenge against someone who tried to destroy you is simply living well. Oh, and that GIF I mentioned? It's a free digital case file I put together just for you, packed with details you won't find in the video. You can grab it instantly through the link in the description or pinned in the comments. So here we are at the end of one of the most disturbing cases in American criminal history. And if you're feeling exhausted, angry, and maybe a little sick to your stomach, that's exactly how you should feel. Because the story of Diane Downs forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about human nature. This case teaches us that evil doesn't always look like what we expect. It doesn't always come with fangs and claws. Sometimes it comes with a pretty smile, a charming personality, and the face of someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally. Diane Downs shattered the sacred bond between mother and child, showing us that some people are capable of unthinkable acts when their own desires matter more than innocent lives. But this case also teaches us something beautiful and powerful: the importance of believing survivors. When little Christie Downs sat in that courtroom and said, "My mom did it," the adults around her listened. They believed her. They fought for her. And because of that, justice was served. Think about how many children throughout history weren't believed when they tried to tell adults about abuse. Christie's courage and the system's willingness to listen to her helped convict a child killer and probably saved other lives. Yes, justice was served when Diane got life plus 50 years. But let's be honest, the damage was already done. Cheryl never got to grow up, fall in love, or have children of her own. Christie and Danny carry the scars of that night forever, even though they built incredible lives. Some wounds never fully heal, even when the person who caused them is locked away. The most important lesson from this case: some people never change. Diane Downs spent 40 years in prison and came out exactly the same person who shot her children in 1983. She's still lying, still manipulating, still playing the victim. That's terrifying, but it's also why cases like this matter. This case shows us that some people never change, but our community here does make a difference. We keep these victim stories alive. We make sure Cheryl, Christie, and Danny aren't forgotten. We honor their truth by refusing to let their mother's lies be the final word. If you want to see more cases that matter, cases where we dig deep into the psychology of evil and celebrate the survivors who overcome it, subscribe to Not True Crimes Untangled and ring that notification bell, because every subscription helps us reach more people who care about justice. Let me know in the comments, what case should we untangle next? I love hearing from you about the stories that haunt you, the cases that demand answers. Thank you for being part of the Not family. Thank you for caring about victims like Christie, Danny, and Cheryl. Thank you for understanding that these aren't just stories. They're real lives, real pain, and real courage. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop believing that truth matters more than lies.